Hey everybody, this is Andre here with the Kevin Breeze channel, and this is pros and cons for the Samsung Galaxy A72. Let's get started. So my first pro for this phone is the display. This phone has a really impressive display with a 6.7-inch 90Hz Super AMOLED display, a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 394, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen-to-body ratio of 84.4%. This display is really impressive. Having such a large size is going to make it great for content consumption, and the 90Hz display is going to make motions on the screen like scrolling, animations, videos, all that sort of thing a lot faster and smoother. Overall, whether you're viewing photos, consuming content like videos, doing high performance gaming, all that stuff is going to be really high quality with the display of this phone. My next pro for this phone is the battery. This phone has a 5,000 milliamp hour battery that supports 25 watt fast charging. So not only is the size pretty much the biggest battery you can get, but it also supports 25 watt fast charging. So you can charge up your phone even faster. Having a big battery is an advantage for many reasons, especially if you're on the go a lot and don't always get the chance to plug in your phone, but still have to use it frequently throughout the day. This is gonna be really helpful. Also, if you want your phone to last for multiple years, basically a really long time, having a larger battery is going to be good because it's not going to degrade as fast as a phone like an iPhone, for example, that has a battery about half the size of this one. My next pro for this phone is the storage. This phone has 128 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion. Even though apps and the system are getting larger and larger, you're still really unlikely to actually run out of space unless you have a lot of photos or shoot a lot of videos, especially 4K videos. Those might take up a lot of space, but you can store that kind of thing on a microSD card. So even then, you should be fine. My next pro for this phone is the camera. In the front here, we got a hole punch for the front-facing camera, and this camera is 32 megapixels. Not only is it high quality, but it also looks really nice on the phone, gives the phone a really nice modern touch. On the back here, we got a 64 megapixel rear camera, a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera, an 8 megapixel telephoto lens, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. So this phone basically has pretty much everything to the point where the macro camera and the telephoto lens are a little bit redundant. With the telephoto lens, that's actually not a very common feature for a mid-level phone like this. You're usually only gonna have a macro camera because telephoto lenses are more of a flagship feature, but this phone does have a telephoto lens, so you can get that real close-up zoom without actually losing the quality. Not only that, but you can also use it kind of like a macro camera, and in my opinion, the photos come out better that way. My last pro for this phone is that it has dust and water resistance. Dust and water resistance is good no matter what environment you're in, but if you're exposed to a lot of dust or water, then obviously it's going to be even more useful. The water resistance goes up to a meter for 30 minutes, so it's a really good addition to this phone. My first pro for this phone is its thickness. This phone is a little bit thicker than the Samsung Galaxy A71, its predecessor, which is kind of a disappointment because newer phones should be thinner, if anything. And I think the A71 was a good size and shape and it had a good feel to it. So I don't really think they needed to change anything. They did, so it's not really that big a deal. But I still do prefer the shape of the A71 a little bit better. My next con for this phone is that there's no wireless charging. Wireless charging is such a nice feature to have, and I really like it. Unfortunately, these days, most of the time, wireless charging is just a flagship feature. Occasionally, a mid-level phone will have it, and I think that this should be more common because it's a feature that all phones can use. So it would have been nice to see on this one. My next con for this phone kind of goes along with the design from the first con, and this is the materials. This phone does look really nice, has a lot to it that gives it a modern feel, but at the same time, this is plastic, this back is plastic, it doesn't have much weight to it. It really feels a little bit cheaper than you would expect, definitely cheaper than I would want from a phone that has a 90Hz Super AMOLED display and all these nice features. It would have been nice to see a little bit of metal on here, maybe some glass on the back, something that makes this phone feel more premium, because right now it really doesn't at all. My next con for this phone is that the macro camera is kind of useless. There's really no point in having a macro camera when there's a telephoto lens, And this isn't really that big a deal as far as cons go, because it doesn't really affect the usability of anything. In fact, I guess it sort of adds something. I just think it's super unnecessary because with a telephoto lens, you can zoom in just as much as you can with the macro camera and get the exact same result. In fact, I'm going to show you side by side what this looks like. Right here is a picture taken by the macro camera, and this is a picture taken with the telephoto lens. As you can see, you get the same exact type of details. Really, the only difference is the angle of the photo and the lighting, because I didn't take it exactly perfect, of course. But really, I personally think the detail is better with the telephoto lens than it is with the macro camera. So it really makes me wonder, what's the point of even having a macro camera, especially since it's not only a little bit trickier to use if you're not familiar with it, but there's also the possibility that, say you use your macro camera, forget to set it back to the normal rear camera, and then go to take a picture and wonder why it's all blurry. Now, if you're really experienced using smartphones, especially phones like this that have macro cameras, this might not happen to you. But for those of you who aren't really that familiar with smartphones yet, especially Android phones, this might happen more often than you would expect. So I personally think that it's better to just have the telephoto lens. It's a lot less confusing because with the telephoto lens, you really don't even need some special mode. You can just zoom in and it's going to get right to where you want it to be. You just need to position and focus it where it needs to go, and then that's pretty much it. With the macro camera, this bar is just like that because I set it like that. By default, the macro camera is not on this bar, and you actually have to go into this section and find the macro camera in here and select it. So the bottom line is the macro camera isn't horrible. It doesn't really hinder anything in the phone, but it's kind of unnecessary, and I don't think they needed to actually include it. My last con for this phone is the processor. This phone is getting 8 gigabytes of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 720G processor. And the reason this processor is a con is because this is the same exact processor as the Samsung Galaxy A52. And this phone's supposed to be a step up from it. And if we look at the score on Geekbench, it's really not that impressive. We got a single core score of 553 and a multi-core score of 1657. Now, this isn't really bad by any means, but it's not good either in my opinion. Just because we saw with the Samsung Galaxy A71, that phone had a multi-core score in the 1700s. Now, I don't expect the successor to every phone to be leaps and bounds ahead of the previous model, but I would think that they would at least improve the processor a little, give it something a little bit more powerful, and instead, they made it actually less powerful. This phone does have a lot of RAM, I will give it that. 8 gigabytes of RAM is great, but at the same time, that's really not going to give it the processing power to do anything more impressive. But this is pros and cons for the Samsung Galaxy A72. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you found it useful as well. If you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. And as always, I will see you guys in the next one.